This is VOA News. Reporting by remote, I'm Joe Ramsey. Countries across Europe considered new curbs on movement on Tuesday, while U.S. President Joe Biden appealed to all Americans to get vaccinated to fight the Omicron variant sweeping the world days before the second Christmas of the pandemic. Omicron infections are multiplying across Europe, the United States, and Asia. Biden said at the White House, quote, "If you're not fully vaccinated, you have good reason to be concerned." He unveiled plans to buy 500 million rapid COVID-19 tests to be distributed for free to Americans who request them starting in January. Biden also activated some 1,000 military medical personnel to support hospitals already being overwhelmed. Omicron now accounts for 73% of all new cases in the United States, up from less than 1% at the beginning of the month. Hans Kluge, the World Health Organization's European head, said within weeks Omicron will dominate in more countries of the region, quote, pushing already stretched health systems further to the brink. Germany, Scotland, Ireland, the Netherlands, and South Korea are among countries to have reimposed partial or full lockdowns or other social distancing measures in recent days. Israel announced on Tuesday it will offer a fourth dose of the COVID-19 vaccine to people older than 60 amid concern about the spread of the Omicron variant. A health ministry expert panel recommended the fourth shot, a decision that was swiftly welcomed by Prime Minister Naftali Bennett as, quote, great news that will help us overcome the Omicron wave that is spreading around the world. The decision is pending formal approval by senior health officials, but Bennett urged Israelis to get the dose as soon as possible. This is VOA News. At least 160 migrants have drowned off Libya's coast after their boat sank over the past week, the International Organization for Migration said on Tuesday. Quote, during the past week, at least 160 lives were lost in the central Mediterranean off the coast of Libya, said a spokesperson for the Geneva-based UN agency. Quote, nearly 1,500 migrants drowned on the route this year, she wrote on Twitter. The IOM said that 466 migrants were intercepted or rescued at sea and returned to Libya between December 12th and 18. Libya, which plunged into civil war following the 2011 toppling and killing of dictator Muammar Gaddafi, has become a key route for migrants seeking to reach Europe to escape poverty and conflict. The United Nations Human Rights Office on Tuesday called for an independent investigation into allegations of sexual violence, including rape and gang rape, during mass anti-coup protests in Sudan earlier this week. A spokeswoman for the UN Human Rights Office in Geneva said they received what she called disturbing reports alleging 13 women and girls were raped or gang raped in the demonstrations on Sunday in the capital, Khartoum. Tens of thousands of Sudanese took to the streets in Khartoum and elsewhere in Sudan on Sunday, marking the third anniversary of the uprising that forced the removal of autocrat Omar al-Bashir in April 2019. The rallies turned violent in many places as security forces moved against the protesters. At least 2 people were killed and over 300 others wounded, according to the Sudan Doctors Committee, a professional medical union. The UN chief warned Tuesday the international community is unlikely to come forth with much-needed support for Lebanon amid its persistent government paralysis and as the country struggles through a, quote, very dramatic crisis. Antonio Guterres' remarks came at the end of his 3-day visit, during which he repeatedly urged Lebanon's political leadership to work together to resolve the economic and financial crisis. The crisis has pushed more than 3/4 of Lebanon's population of 6 million into poverty. The national currency is in perpetual collapse, while the Lebanese blame the political leadership for years of corruption and mismanagement. Gutierrez said several initiatives were in the works to help Lebanon deal with the crisis, including holding an international conference, but that the government's paralysis will not help international support. Find more on these stories and the rest of the day's news on our website, voanews.com, or follow us on the VOA mobile app. Reporting by remote, I'm Joe. This is VOA News. Reporting by remote, I'm Joe Ramsey. Top U.S. infectious disease expert Dr. Anthony Fauci said on Wednesday Americans vaccinated and boosted against COVID-19 can be with family over the holidays, but attending large gatherings is not safe, even for those who received a booster dose. The United States faces a second Christmas of upended holiday plans with a surge in infections fueled by the now dominant Omicron variant of the coronavirus, forcing many to cancel travel, reconsider visiting loved ones, and question attending holiday parties. Early evidence indicates Omicron is less severe than the Delta variant, said Fauci, citing studies from South Africa and Scotland, but warned Americans must remain cautious. The U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention says Omicron represents approximately 73% of cases across the U.S., and as high as 90% of cases in some areas, such as the eastern Atlantic states, parts of the Midwest, South, and northern Pacific states. An Israeli health official said Wednesday the recommendation to offer fourth doses of a COVID-19 vaccine was based on the rapid spread of the Omicron variant and an apparent waning of immunity after an initial booster jab. While the official stressed Wednesday the decision is only a recommendation, Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett said Tuesday he had already instructed health officials to begin preparations for a rollout of fourth doses. The campaign is to begin with people over 60 and healthcare workers, but based on past vaccination efforts, it could quickly include other segments of the population. Bennett's office said the campaign, which still requires official approval, is expected to begin in the coming days. Find more at voanews.com. This is VOA News. The U.S. Navy's Fifth Fleet said on Wednesday that two of its patrol coastal ships seized a cargo of illicit weapon from a stateless fishing vessel during a flag verification boarding in the North Arabian Sea on Monday. The shipment consists of approximately 1,400 AK-47 assault rifles and 226,000 rounds of ammunition, the fleet said in a statement. Quote, the stateless vessel was assessed to have originated in Iran and transited international waters along a route historically used to traffic weapons unlawfully to the Houthis in Yemen, it added. Direct or indirect supply, sale, or transfer of weapons to the Houthi movement violates UN Security Council resolutions and U.S. sanctions. The vessel's 5 crew members, who identified themselves as Yemeni nationals, will be returned to Yemen, the fleet said, adding the U.S. naval forces sank the vessel after removing the crew and illicit cargo. The UN Security Council on Wednesday unanimously adopted a U.S. proposed resolution to help humanitarian aid reach desperate Afghans while seeking to keep funds out of Taliban hands. The resolution, a first step by the UN after months of wrangling over how to avert a humanitarian catastrophe amid economic meltdown in Afghanistan, was welcomed by the Islamists as a, quote, good step. Since the Taliban swept back to power in August, billions of dollars in aid and assets have been frozen by the West in what the UN has described as unprecedented fiscal shock to the aid-dependent Afghan economy. For months now, observers have been warning that millions face a choice between starvation or migration during a combined food, fuel, and cash crisis throughout the bitter winter. And the United States and its partners are discussing timeframes for nuclear diplomacy with Iran, U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said on Wednesday, adding that current talks with Tehran may be exhausted within weeks. Quote, we're not circling a date on the calendar in public, but I can tell you that behind closed doors, we are talking about timeframes, and they are not long, he told reporters during a visit to Israel. Asked to elaborate on the timeline, Sullivan said weeks. Israel has long hinted that it thinks diplomacy has hit a dead end on the slow-moving talks between Iran and world powers in Vienna on reviving a 2015 nuclear deal, and Israel has warned it could resort to preemptive strikes against its sworn enemy. Sullivan said the United States continues to believe that diplomacy remains the best way to prevent Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapon. Reporting by remote, I'm Joe Ramsey.
This is VOA News. Via remote, I'm Marissa Melton. More than a dozen Western powers on Thursday expressed anger that Russian mercenaries working for the controversial Wagner Group have started to deploy in Mali. Those powers accuse Moscow of providing material backing for the fighters. The powers involved in the fight against an insurgency in Mali, including Canada, Germany, France, and the United Kingdom, said they, quote, firmly condemn the deployment of mercenary troops on Malian territory. It was one of the first official acknowledgments by Western capitals that the deployment of fighters has begun in Mali after months of warnings to the Bamako government. But the statement did not say that the presence of the Wagner Group in Mali would result in a pullout of foreign forces. During his annual end-of-the-year press conference, Russian President Vladimir Putin said Thursday that Washington's willingness to discuss Russia's security proposals to curb NATO's eastward expansion was positive amid Western fears over a major military escalation in Ukraine. Russia last week presented the United States and NATO with draft proposals summarizing its demands in return for a de-escalation of tensions over the ex-Soviet Ukraine. The document said that NATO must not admit new members into the military alliance and called for no military bases to be established in ex-Soviet countries. Putin told journalists during his 4-hour press conference, quote, the ball is in their court. They need to provide us with some answers. Russia's far-reaching demands were dismissed by several members of the U.S.-led alliance. More on that and all the stories we're covering at our website, voanews.com. This is VOA News. In the early morning hours Thursday, Hong Kong's oldest university dismantled and removed a statue commemorating democracy protesters killed by Chinese troops around Tiananmen Square in 1989. Dissident Chinese artists have decried the statue's removal, telling AFP, the French news agency, that artistic freedoms are evaporating as Beijing tightens control. The nearly 9-meter-tall pillar of shame, which depicts 50 torn and twisted bodies piled on top of each other, was made by a Danish sculptor to symbolize the lives lost during the bloody military crackdown on pro-democracy protesters in Beijing on June 4, 1989. Author Joan Didion has died. She's best known for her essays, memoirs, novels, and screenplays, as well as her grief over the deaths of her husband and daughter. The cause of death was Parkinson's disease, according to her publisher on Thursday. Didion first emerged as a writer of substance in the late 1960s as an early practitioner of what was called new journalism, which allowed writers to take a narrative, more personalized perspective. Joan Didion was 87 years old. Security researchers say they've confirmed that a third Polish opposition figure had his phone hacked with sophisticated spyware from the Israeli company NSO Group. The senator was hacked nearly 36 times using NSO's Pegasus spyware when he was running the opposition's campaign against the right-wing populist government in 2019 parliamentary elections. The opposition figure says he believes the hacking revelations call into question whether that election was fair. A Polish government spokesman would neither confirm nor deny ordering the hacks or say whether it's an NSO client. A company spokesperson said Pegasus is only supposed to be used against terrorists and criminals. NSO says it's terminated contracts with governments that abuse those terms. 2 British studies provide some early hints that the Omicron variant of the coronavirus may be milder than the Delta version. Scientists stress that even if the findings of these early studies hold up, any reductions in severity need to be weighed against the fact that Omicron spreads much faster than Delta and is more able to evade vaccines. Sheer numbers of infections could still overwhelm hospitals. China has shut down a city of 13 million people in a bid to extinguish a tiny COVID-19 outbreak and chase its zero-case goal. Via remote, I'm Marissa Melton, VOA News. This is VOA News. Via remote, I'm Marissa Melton. Pope Francis has celebrated Christmas Eve Mass before an estimated 2,000 people in St. Peter's Basilica. He went ahead with the service despite the resurgence in COVID-19 cases that prompted a new vaccine mandate for Vatican employees. The Pope did not wear a mask as he processed down the central aisle of the Basilica. While Friday's service is labeled Midnight Mass, it actually began at 7:30 p.m. local time. The early hour was both in deference to the needs of the 85-year-old Pope and a holdover from last year when the service had to end before Italy's nationwide COVID-19 curfew. Also, like last year, the virus is still an active threat. For the second day in a row, Italy on Friday registered a record in daily infections. U.S. President Joe Biden and First Lady Jill Biden are bringing Christmas Eve cheer to hospitalized children who aren't well enough to go home for the holidays. It's longstanding tradition for First Ladies to visit Children's National Hospital in Washington, D.C. at Christmas time. But Joe Biden's visit was a surprise. The White House says it's the first time a sitting president has joined the fun. The annual tradition of a hospital visit by the First Lady dates back to Bess Truman, who served in the role from 1945 to 1953. And Taliban officials in Afghanistan confirmed Friday they've discussed plans with a joint delegation from Turkey and Qatar for firms from the two countries to run airports in Kabul and other Afghan cities. The talks come as the international community looks for ways to scale up delivery of urgently needed humanitarian aid to Afghanistan. From Washington, this is VOA News. Authorities in Niger said Friday that at least 6 people were killed in attacks by suspected jihadis in Niger, near its border with Burkina Faso. They said 10 others were wounded when heavily armed gunmen simultaneously attacked a border post and a bridge near the border town of Makalandi. Makalandi is the last major town in Niger before the border with Burkina Faso. It's about 100 kilometers southwest of the capital, Niamey. It lies in a flashpoint zone where the frontiers of Niger, Burkina Faso, and Mali converge. Niger is contending with 2 jihadist insurgencies, 2 different branches of Islamic State, one of them aligned with the terrorist group Boko Haram. Saudi state-run media say a Yemeni rebel attack on the Saudi border town of Jizan killed 2 people and wounded 7 more late Friday. The Saudi press agency said Yemen's Houthi rebels launched a projectile that killed a Saudi citizen and a Yemeni resident. It said 6 of the wounded were Saudis and 1 was a Bangladeshi national. Shrapnel also smashed into nearby cars and shops. The cross-border attack is just the latest in Yemen's long-running civil war by the Shiite Houthi rebels following an escalation of Saudi-led military coalition airstrikes on the rebel-held capital of Sana'a. Saudi airstrikes rocked Sana'a early Friday, hitting a military camp near the city center, this according to both Houthi and Saudi media. A South African cabinet minister said on Friday urged the cancellation of an upcoming U.S. auction of a key to the Robben Island prison cell where Nelson Mandela, the country's first black president, was long jailed for his opposition to apartheid. The key is among Mandela memorabilia being sold by Guernsey's auction house in New York on January 28th. Most of the items were provided by members of Mandela's family to raise funds for a planned museum and garden around his grave, while the key is being sold by Mandela's former jailer, who became his friend. Rescuers in northern Myanmar said the confirmed death toll from a landslide at an illegal jade mine had risen to 6 on Friday as they called off the search operation with dozens still missing and presumed dead. Scores die each year working in the country's lucrative but poorly regulated jade trade, which sees low-paid migrant workers scrape out gems highly coveted in neighboring China. Authorities had initially estimated at least 70 people were feared missing after the torrent of rocks and earth swept into the lake early Wednesday. Later said they were still trying to confirm that figure. Via remote, I'm Marissa Melton, VOA